Morning, T. And our next speaker, who is going to expand on the groundwork that Nanye has just laid in terms of neural networks. We have Wilfrid Luo, who's from the School of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, and we'll go into more detail about neural networks and the variety of models and embeddings. So I'll hand you over to Wilfrid.
Thank you. Thank you. Your introduction, David. Good morning, everyone. My name is Wilfrid, and today I will talk about something hopefully not too heavy, because I know everybody hates math. Oh, okay. I guess I am the only one who hates the math. Okay. Anyway, so instead I will leave this room as possible as I can to be more intuitive with some examples. Hopefully today will be enough curiosity for you guys. So anyway. Okay, so when people hear AI, the first clue probably I would imagine is a lot of images. But I understand the agriculture domain produces more than images. So it's much richer than just images. But definitely, we certainly have some crop images. And in this case, computer vision techniques will become incredibly successful here. And we also have some sensor data, weather observation records, those kind of thing. It's naturally time series. And the last data structure I would like to mention is the graph, which is like the entity relationships between the entities, like those farmers, those crops, those entities, who grows the plants, sort of thing. So anyway, the key message I want to leave here is we have different data structures. So in this case, we need different neural networks to adapt to your data you possessed. So before we discuss the neural networks, let's do a little bit more like quick overview about 20 years ago, how people managed to do this data modeling. Imagine you have this kind of data, and people what used to do is they kind of manually build those features, those dimensions, like, okay, I have tons of the images, the tests, and I do some statistical counts, and I still live in camera slide. Sorry. Okay, thank you. So we counted things, we averaged things, and into those we specified dimensions. So we summarize this data to this distribution features and the counting things. So these are so fast, and these are measurable, and mathematically they are interpretable. But they probably wouldn't too good for current AI models. It's because it lost too much of the information. Why I mentioned that? Because normally, if I just give you images and tests and you're just counting those kind of words or pixels, wouldn't give you any information, valuable information. So what we can have examples is, for example, in the vision, computer vision domain. So it's like, this is what we call the color histograms. So what we can do is, for each images, we basically count the pixel values of the colors. So we get those RGB distribution very neat. But it probably useless because I can imagine one simple question, and I can just make you agricultural experts all knuckling under. Anybody wants to try? So basically, if I say, okay, I have a species, currently it consists of 30% of the grains, what kind of the species it is. So you guys probably would figure out. So this is a traditional statistical counts would fail in this way. Another example from text side is what we call the bag of words. Is we count the words occurrence regardless of the grammar of the position. So in our computer science guys, definitely 20 years ago, a man bites a dog is equally to the dog bites a man because of the frequency of each word is just the same. So in this case, the images and text, you lost the valuable information from just simply looking at the pixel values and those word counting. So from the man's perspective, what we're going to do is dig in the information what we need. So this is how we bring this concept in, is we call embedding, which is really important. So basically what we're going to do is instead of simply looking at those statistically counting, and we will imagine we have a arbitrary giant space. So we want to find out a representation of our data in a like the red ribbon here, we call it manifold. So we assume those data are all lies down on the data manifold, which is most useful for human being for the interest. So we have such manifold hypotheses like we want to find an embedding space which is most suitable for our data. So the purpose is we want to find out a function for mapping. So we map those raw inputs, those data, images, text, whatever you need, whatever you have, into this specific manifold. So at the end of the day, the embedding space of each of the data representation would be a simple vector of it. So remember what Nan introduced earlier. So we have those embeddings. So just remember this is just a vector of the data. But no matter how many dimensions you have, we don't care. We just care about the information lies down into this embedding vector. So remember, we have the images, those different type of data. So we have different assumptions about the data. So in this case, about the data, different type, we have different architecture of, those neural networks. So for the image data, we have a pretty gentle assumption is like, so for this data, for the images, 1 pixel value is close enough to the to its neighbor. It's easily to interpret is like, for example, if I have maybe a spot on a leaf, so I identified the black spot, which means if you zoom a little bit in, you would probably observe the surrounding of the black spot would have also same dark area. So this is an assumption for images. So that's what we're going to introduce next. And for the text data, we have different assumptions. Like it's like a sequence. So we have such dependencies among the whole sequences. So next, I will introduce those neural networks in particular. So I will start with the convolutional neural networks with a car example, recognition example. So before everything else, I would like to mention a little bit more on the neural networks training. So here's the thing. So imagine you have a box, which is your neural networks. Basically, it's your those middle of the layer of the those decomposition, those gray scale things. So this middle box is your model inside. So what you have now is your input images, cost, and your final prediction, which is the green distribution. This is basically tells you how's the probability of each of the item class this image should be. So what we're going to do for training is we have such input data, and after the model neural networks processing, we get the prediction of your entity. So what we train the model is based on the differences of the prediction and your label, which is because, of course, the man can interpret this picture easily. This is a car, but the model would probably think, okay, this is a dog. So the differences between a car and dog would have such information. So it will guide the model to correct it itself, which we call training process. So in this case, the more data you get, and then after this backward, forward pass and the backward, back forward, back propagation, you would have update this your neural network, and finally you will get a good model for recognizing whether it's a car or not. So let's start with the CNN anyway. So CNN, as I mentioned before, it assumes the nearby pixels of each arbitrary one they are related together. So CNN is designed around exactly following this assumption. Instead of looking at whole images, what CNN is going to do is what we call convolution operator. So think about, we have a detector, which is the blue 3x3 window here. I think maybe a little bit latency. Yeah. So imagine you have such detector. It will slice over the picture, and it has the weights, so which is your model weights. So you have such detector slicing over the window, and you get the output of the calculation of this operator. And finally, you get the output of these images after the whole detector. It's basically like, okay, you have the image, you have the detector, and the detector firstly look at the surroundings, maybe the background, and then the edge, and then the central of the images, the central of the identity. So it's basically like the gradually learn the features of your images and interpret each local region into a valuable information for computer. So, but for human, we can, those are human readable. We can easily know what's the image about. So but for CNN operator, this convolution operator is like, do I see the edge in this leaf? Do I see the texture? Do I see the color? Basically, that's the CNN is doing. So after the layer by layer stack, so we have such feed forward constructor. Is that imagine at the very beginning the car. So we have the input image of the car. Increasingly, the CNN model will build abstract representations of this car, and finally produce a vectors at the right-hand side at the end, which is embedding, which is the final representation of the car. And based on this embedding, we can interpret it into different classes and our objectives. So CNN works beautifully for those kind of image data. But however, if our data is not an image, so what will change? For example, like the sensor data, it changes over the time. So can CNN also functionally well? Probably not. So that's where the next neural network, the recurrent neural network in, but I will leave that a little bit later. So based on this CNN, we have many applications on the computer vision domain. So this, for example, have the image, you would do classification, whether it's a cat, and also you do the semantic segmentation. It's basically different color represents the different semantic meaning. It has a different embeddings to represent the part of the images. So you would distinguish the identity from just simply looking at the color. And objective detection, those kind of thing is like, okay, I have the instruction, I want to detect the animals here, but how many and what are they? I don't know. But by those trained model, we could easily get the bounding box of the objectives, and we can easily recognize them. So as I mentioned before, if the data is not images, so what we can do is those sequentially data modeling. So in this case, those feed-forward neural network structure wouldn't functionally well too much. So how is that going to be is, so basically the assumption for CNN is the region is locally related. But however, the sequence is especially for the time series, it's long time dependency over the whole sequences, right? So every observation wouldn't be treated independently. So that's basically how CNN can't do well in this case. So for recurrent neural network, the basic idea is instead of processing every observation independently, the neural network will carry the information forward. For example, the timestamps come in, the census data at day 1, day 2, day 3, and the neural network, the recurrent neural network will carry this information day by day and rolling over the whole sequences till the end. So let's zoom in a little bit to see how exactly where does the recurrent come from. This is how we can see the same network unfolded across the times, and the neural network inside of this is just a single layer of this. It will reuse the information it produced again, and to produce the next stage information. So that's where the recurrent way observed. So it also has tons of the application of this model. So as I mentioned before, like we observe many timestamps, the census data, but we only need to produce the final prediction. For example, maybe productivity of the crop, right? So you observe the seasonal data or daily data, and you get the sensor weather day by day and accumulating till the end. And finally, you get the output, which is a prediction of, okay, this particular corn, how many productivities it would be. So if you your final task is not just producing the final answer, we also have such multiple output turnout, multiple way turnout recurrent neural network, which is, so assuming every time step produces another output here. So it will summarize over the whole sequences at once. The very classical example here, I couldn't find the agriculture domain, sorry, but I do have a neat example, which is the machine translation. So it's basically like the information flows streamingly, like it's like a stream roll over the whole sequences, and you have to get the translation immediately, and also combining the previous information to get the final predicted status. So beyond that, we also have the networks data, which is graph structured. Those networks like proteins, those relations like diseases spread between plants, those kind of relations, we can build them into a network. So a little bit different from the CNN and the RNN. It's a little bit hard to get such intuition. Like for CNN, we look at the local region at once, and for RNN, we look at the whole sequences dependency. But for graph data, what kind of the analogy we are finding is the motivation of the graph neural networks. So, but first of all, I would like to build this general formulation for graph learning. Is you have the graph data, and what kind of tasks you could do is, for example, the node classification, you would identify what kind of a corpse under what kind of spread diseases, or the link prediction. For example, can a man maybe can a corn infected by bacteria, which is like the relation is infected by. So this is the two common tasks. So, however, there's one particular application we need to go through is this kind of graph structure. We just decompose it into the link, like between the node entities and also the node classification of entity itself. We also could look at the whole networks, which is interpreted as a community. So we could compare the community similarity, for example, two proteins, two maybe crops, groups, species, how similar they are, and is it likely to have the one symptoms at the another? So in graph tasks, we could have this interpretation. And the node classification we mentioned before is that we want to predict those unlabeled node of especially your entities. So it's a bit hard, as I mentioned before. CNN and RNN assumption would lost the functionality here. So we need a new analogy for this graph data. So instead of looking at the local or globally, we kind of have a assumption which is called homophilia assumption. This is basically saying, remember, our final goal is to get the representation of our data. So today's deep learning toolbox like CNN and RNNs wouldn't do that for us, but for especially for graph data, sorry. So we cannot simply apply this convolution operator or those time series, modeling from RNN on graph data. So as I mentioned before, the homophilia assumption is basically laying down this graph topology, which is after your neural network, the embedding, i.e. the representation of the data, your graph data, those nodes, those embedding of each node should be close to each other if they are similar. For example, the black corns, maybe no black corns, is there? Black corns, white corns, yellow corns, they are all corns. So they should be close enough together. And far away from maybe dogs, those kind of other entities. So this is the way we want built on graph data. So we want to find such representation, i.e. the embeddings of nodes or graphs, which is similar enough for itself. The class. So the idea of the graph embedding here is we embed nodes of the graph. So we kind of want to find out the encoder of your graph data. And after the encode, the embedding at the embedding space would be close enough if they are factually similar. So the goal here or the tricky part here is how do we define this encoder and the similarity? Remember we said before, those embeddings are basically just vectors. So you could define such similarity between vectors and vectors, right? The high school math, how do you calculate the similarity between two vectors, right? And the tricky part is how do we define this encoder, which is the graph neural network here. So specifically, we look at the one target node. For example, the A here. So we noticed that it connected with the D and the B, those two nodes. So at the right-hand side, the first layer, the closest neighbor of the A is the BCD, as you noticed here. And the next layer, the B and C and D, for example, the B would connect it back to the A and also connect it to C. So the neighbor of B would at the next layer is A and C. So remember the homophilia assumption we mentioned before is that similar atoms should be close enough together. So here, if we imagine we have the representation of each node perfectly, then under this graph structure, what kind of information flow we have here is that the information will flow through those connected links. For example, the A and C, those informations will flow into the B. So which makes the embedding of the B, I mean the representation of the B, contains the information from A and C. So in this case, if you have the final embedding of all of the nodes, in this mechanism we call the message pathing, would cause the result that the final representation of each node should be close enough together if there exists the links between the connected nodes. So that's basically the graph neural network here. So different layer is what we called the message passing calculation we mentioned before. And the gray box here is what we want the neural network weight in. So in this whole mechanism, I left all the notations out and leave you guys with this intuition. It's just the message passing through the graph from the neighbors and updates the node embedding after the graph neural network processing. So one of the particular example application is the recommendation system. So it's basically like I know you guys shopping all around the Amazon, so you probably wonder why those maybe I'm interested item would pop out every time I click the screen. So this is basically, you clicked similar items before, and next time the system would propagate this message, like you are treated as a node, the user node. And what the information flows back to you is the items nodes. There's the information. You clicked, they are similar, so assume you have the similar interests to the similar items. That's basically how recommender system works. After those heavy 3 neural networks, I would like to do some models, neural networks on simply about the representational learning, which is learned embeddings. The first one is autoencoder. This is not just because as we mentioned before, we have those images, those nodes, we have the labels. But if we have no labels to the data, what can we do for this useful representation for the data? So this is exactly how we do is we encode the input first into a representation, which in the middle we call latent representation. And we use a decoder decoded from this representation vector and bring it back to the original input to see if they are fairly similar enough. So this is basically what we call reconstruction process in this particular model. And another model we call VA is a little bit complicated. It's a generative model. So for AE model, so if this encoder only have some dots, so if you give technically it cannot reconstruct the images for rabbits because only have seen the dogs example. But for VAE, we kind of imagine we have a latent distribution over here. So every images basically you encode them into this distribution, and this distribution recognize which category it should belong. So hopefully next time I could reconstruct or generate, we call it here, generate different type of the same class data from the distribution. For example, here, we give one rabbit, but we get another rabbit come out. But if you look at it closely, the feature, for example, the color, the fur, are almost the same. And at the end, I would like to introduce the most recent research on VLMs. You probably knows those ChatGPT thing, those Anthropic thing. So counts of the model family like Queen's, in turn VL, those VLM models, they built on the transformers. I think we are gonna discuss this later. So you could have these applications. So you input the the streaming data. Based on your instructions, you can just simply type your instruction. I want whatever tasks. So the model will interpret your language, and based on your input data, it will automatically produce the goal you want. So this is quite interesting research area here. Like, for example, auto harvest. I know this look a little bit fancy, but less fancy than the Megatron at the very beginning, right? I don't think this kind of auto harvest is like the Megatron actually working in the field. So at the end, I also want to introduce a quick demo of how those neural networks, the most recent top technology, could be applied on the agriculture domain, which is basically agriculture consultation. I'm no expert in this area, but I assume the process is basically the user, they will keep nagging about, okay, my garden is dead, my plant is dead. So they will keep uploading those images and queries to the expert. So you have to identify those, those ambiguous, unclear images and identify the disease, this kind of thing, and give the management instructions. So this is basically, sorry, I have to share this to Zoom. Okay. So basically, that's the thing we can do. The user uploaded an ambiguous image. Nobody can interpret it. So a wise expert, probably in this case, would ask for clarification from user rather than just give the answer. Otherwise, the user is going to be furious about your answer. So we can see here, the user asked, my tomato leaves has dark spots. To be honest, I don't see any dark spots here. So the wise expert is going to do is we run the consultation process. Okay, so this is the input from the user, and then the VLM agents, which is a simulated agricultural expert. Okay, he said, I need one sharpened image before diagnosing. So this is kind of wise movement. So one more turn needed. So we add more details. Okay, suddenly magic happening. The images is much more clear than before. So then in this case, the expert could get definitely much more confident answer than before. So this looks like the most consistent with a bacteria spot or fungus, whatever, based on the knowledge of the this automated expert. So this is basically current research on those neural networks, those VLMs, those LMs, those top-level models could do. So the AI in agriculture would definitely plays a more and more important role. And I hope this give you enough intuition and thoughts. This is my reference and acknowledgement. Thank you.
Wilfrid. Do we have any questions in the audience? Because okay, we have several, a bunch. Yeah, thank you. We're on that up. You can start by yelling.
Thanks for the talk. Just a question about RNNs. Just trying to wrap my head because I am not too familiar with them. Is it correct to say that an RNN tries to encode the previous prediction as like a quasi state?
Okay, this question is about how RNN interpret previous message. Like the whole sequence. Imagine, maybe I will still use the translation example. So, for human being, it's like a sentence into your mind is like the whole sentences. But in the computer science, it's like a sequence sequentially inputted. So each of the characters would be sequentially inputted into the model. So the model will first look at, for example, at the very first step is what, and then time is it. So decompose it into 5 steps. So what RNN do is, first of all, takes the input from the first step. Then it outputs some, as I mentioned before, the representation, right? So the representation state of this what characters. Then the second characters come in. So it should be the times. Then the time information through inputted into the model, and the representation becomes fused with the what information. So now the current representation contains the information from both what and the time, and do it recurrently. The original information from the last state would be inputted back to the next state, and the information from the very beginning of the sequence would be accumulated over the time and rolling over until the end of the sequences.
Does that mean if you have a really long sequence,
yes,
you start to get into problems with the size of the representation?
Basically, no. But the information is accumulating, but the size of the representation is stable. So we only have the representation of this particular task at this sentence. So we maintain those representation in a fixed shape. So the more information come in, we just update the embedding to represent more and more information. So that's basically the mechanic.
The embedding stays the same size, but it has to fit more and more information.
Yeah, fit more and more.
So you lose a little bit of maybe accuracy in there.
Yeah, a little bit. As long as your sequences goes, sufficiently large, you definitely will lose some control at the very end, very beginning of the sequences. This we call some forgetting mechanism here. So the RNN, another analogy here is probably think about your memory. So you remember the thing today, you probably wouldn't remember what I have done today for next year. So this is basically the RNN analogy for intuition. Does this answer your question?
Yeah.
Thanks very much for the talk. This question is slightly technical, but I've wondered about this with neural networks. I mean, I often work with structured data, spatial, temporal, and in classical statistics, you need to model that dependency structure, not just so that you get your mean predictions right, but so that you calibrate the uncertainty of your predictions correctly, especially for, say, unbalanced data sets and things. Like, neural network, even if you have an embedding that respects how close things are in a structural sense, how do you know you've calibrated your predictions kind of correctly for that
Okay, this is good question. Actually, how do you? So your question is about how do you exactly know those similar items are close enough together? Were the close enough item, are they truly similar? Is that so?
Well, not so much. Like in an unbalanced data set, let's say spatially, let's say I had hundreds of observations really close together
Yeah.
and the rest spread out. I don't want my prediction to be biased too much towards the cluster. So in a spatial model, your autocorrelation matrix would kind of degrade observations that are too close to each other because they're not really independent evidence in favor of your inference that you want to make. So you want to calibrate how much information you have. You don't want to treat each observation equally. You want to reweight them according to their dependencies.
So this I will use the GN, a graph neural network example to explain. So here's the thing. So even though we have such homophilia assumption, which is close enough nodes and entities should be close together at the embedding space. So, but definitely after the message passing again, the bias would accumulate as well. So the noise is also propagated through the neural network. For example, I'm not a dog, but I have a dog. So I keep a dog. So which means I connected with a dog. So two nodes, me and dog, has a connection. But I'm definitely not a dog. I'm a human being. So I should close to enough to you guys. But however, some, occasionally case, nobody know me. And a new guy walk in, just say, okay, a dog is presenting. So that's the bias and noise accumulated. So as you mentioned, some calibrating mechanism, for example, the reweighting system could be relatively, mitigate the gap. But however, the bias, how do we manage to control this is still a very tough technical question to solve. So it's basically like, pros and cons. So from the other side, you want to kind of get the global control, global information of the community of each node. You want to have such good cluster shapes. And from the other side, you would inevitably to add some noise into the cluster. So I'm no expert in the calibrating skills or mechanisms or techniques, but I think this is worthwhile to have some research on that. But me personally, I did some recommendation system research before. So the way we kind of keep such noise is, so as I mentioned before, so I have a dog, so which means the global graph have such relation pair, me and dog. So after a certain steps of the graph neural network's propagation, I would deliberately remove some noisy links, the edges. For example, in this case, I would remove this kind of me and dog connections after the certain steps of the training to keep the consistency of the global knowledge.
I think I might just quickly add to, we've got like 1 minute, and I want to say, I think in the graph neural network, I think in the case of GNNs, the message passing algorithm is basically aggregating information from neighbors. So every node gets updated according to what its neighbors' values are. And if you have dense regions of neighbors, so neighborhoods that are going to just pass a lot of information between each other, I think there is normalization done for the degree, for the number of neighbors that you have, depending on what that aggregation algorithm looks like. And so I'm not sure if that sort of thing is addressing your question, Luke, but there are modifications to the message passing algorithms to try and deal with the fact that there are biases in the way that information propagates in the network based on density of connections. So we will probably need to leave it at that, because I think